Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Advanced English podcast by I Speak English. My name is Hayley. This is a brand new project for me. This is a pilot episode. I'm just going to put it out there, kind of 10 to 20 minutes, see if you guys like it. And if you do, I'm going to continue the podcast. So in this podcast, we're going to talk about like real English that people actually speak, ranging from, different expressions to accents, also just deeper conversations about life, culture, and just everything in between, really. So in this first episode, we're going to be looking at something that confuses a lot of speakers, even some native speakers, and that is British English. Specifically, we're going to take a look at accents. So why does a country so small and such a small island have so many different accents? Why are they sometimes so different even that Brits struggle to understand each other? And how does it compare to American English, which seems to be kind of more uniform in comparison? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. If my accent or my voice is a little too fast for you, this podcast might not be for you. It is for advanced speakers, advanced and proficiency speakers. So I'm not going to be changing my voice a lot or slowing down my speech. I'm going to be talking as I normally talk. And if you're struggling to understand, there are captions available for you as well. So just kind of turn those on and you'll be able to see exactly what I'm saying. And the transcript is available also in the description of this video as well. Alright, so like I said, we're going to be talking about accents today, so grab a cuppa, settle in, and let's get into it. Right, so today's episode is all about British English. So first of all, what do I mean when I say British English? What does that actually mean? So a lot of learners imagine like a posh sounding accent, maybe something like a BBC News reader, or how the royal family speaks. This is what's known as received pronunciation. And it used to be seen as the correct way to speak in Britain, kind of very educated, upper class, neutral. But the truth is, very few people actually speak like that in real life anymore. In fact, estimates suggest that only about 2% of the British population use RP as their regular accent, or it is their native accent, let's say. So instead, you've got this incredible variety of regional accents and dialects all across the UK, and they even change every 10 minutes or so. You can get a completely different accent. If I even think about me and my dad, for example, my dad was, grew up in the exact same town as me. He was born 10 minutes away, but we speak completely differently. So, for example, I'll say look and book and cook. He'll say luke and book and cook. Just completely different, just because he grew up on the opposite side of town to me. So it's so variable, the amount of accents that you get. In London alone, you'll hear Cockney, you'll hear Estuary English, you'll hear multicultural London English, and even bits and bobs of RP as well, often all in the same tube carriage. Head up north and you'll get Scouse in Liverpool, Mancunian in Manchester, Geordie in Newcastle, Yorkshire English across the county. Then you've got Welsh English, Scottish English, which itself includes different accents like Glaswegian and Highland, and then you've got Northern Irish English as well. It's honestly an accent lover's dream, or nightmare, depending on how good you are at listening. And this isn't just about pronunciation, it's vocabulary, it's rhythm, expressions. I mean, someone from London might say, I'm absolutely shattered, but someone from Newcastle might go, oh, I'm clammed out. Both mean they're exhausted, but the expressions are totally different, and if you're not used to it, you can get easily lost. So that begs the question, why does the UK have such intense regional variation? Well, the first reason's history, really. The UK has a long, complicated past. We've had Celtic tribes, Roman occupation, Anglo-Saxon settlements, Viking invasions, and the Norman conquest, all of which left various linguistic traces. So these layers of history have affected our pronunciation, our vocabulary, and grammar in different parts of the country. But one of the most important reasons is lack of movement. So until the 20th century, most people lived and died within 20 miles of where they were born, basically. That meant that speech patterns developed in relative isolation. For example, a farming community in Yorkshire, kind of cut off from neighbouring regions by hills or rivers, might develop its own distinct accent over centuries. And even more fascinating is how kind of identity and pride play a role as well. People don't just grow up with an accent, they identify with it. So your accent was a badge of honour, really. It told people where you were from, sometimes even what class you were in. And in many parts of the UK, accents do carry strong social signals, and people really hold on to them. They don't want to sound like everyone else. And they can be very useful as well. You know, I think it's a uniquely kind of British thing to be able to tell exactly what part of the UK someone is from based on their accent. You know, as soon as somebody hears me speak, they'll know I'm from the north, but they might not know exactly what city I'm from because my accent's changed a lot. But if you do have a regional accent straight away, you know, I can tell as soon as I go back to the UK, I can tell, oh, he's from Liverpool, or oh, she's from Birmingham. You can tell what city someone's from as soon as they open their mouth, and I think it's such a uniquely kind of British thing. I don't think I've heard of Americans being able to do that, or Australians, or even like Italians. Maybe they might get the region, but not the exact city, you know. So I kind of find that fascinating, that it's like a uniquely British thing. But my question is, like, why? Like, how did this develop this way? How did such a small island develop all these accents? Where did they come from? And there's actually quite a fascinating linguistic idea that it comes from the geography of the land. So the geography shapes the sound of the accent. And yeah, it might sound a bit far-fetched, but just hear me out, let me explain. So linguists have studied how landscape can influence the way that people speak. In valleys, for example, you know, if you live in a valley, sound doesn't travel far. It kind of gets trapped, you know, within the gorges and valleys you're in. And this can lead to people using more open vowels, clear enunciation, and simply because people needed to be understood, you know, in that close community. In contrast, coastal regions, you often hear more kind of nasal accents, like in the UK, for example, Scouse accents are very nasal. If you go to the US, New York, they're very nasal. Boston is quite a nasal accent. They're all on the coast there. One theory is that fishermen and dock workers needed to shout over wind and waves, so their voice became more kind of nasal and clipped to cut through that noise. You'll also find that kind of mountainous, hilly terrain contributes to the development of quite distinct accents, even between villages. If it's, you know, a pain to get from one village to another, people don't mix much, then their speech will slowly evolve independently. You know, actually in some parts of the UK, people joke that you can cross a river and hear a different accent, and honestly, they're not exaggerating. Travel from, you know, Sheffield to Manchester, it's about an hour. The difference in accents is massive. Same with Liverpool, it's about half an hour from Manchester to Liverpool. And even within the city of Liverpool, there's micro accents based on different neighbourhoods. It's really fascinating. I gave the example of me and my dad before. He grew up 10 minutes from me. His accent's completely different. This brings another factor in, urbanisation. So in big cities, where lots of people live close together, accents evolve rapidly. You get new slang, you get new rhythms, language gets influenced by immigration, youth culture, media. That's why you have newer dialects, like multicultural London English, for example, which is spoken by younger people of all different ethnic backgrounds, and it blends Jamaican, Nigerian, Bengali, Cockney, and British English all together. And that's something that I love, actually. You know, the odd time that I've been to London is listening to all the different accents there. And in particular, multicultural London English as well. It's got a certain kind of twang to it that just sounds very, like, homey to me, even though I'm not from London. It's got this, like, hominess to it. But there is unfortunately a kind of negative side to certain accents. through no fault of anyone's really. I don't know where this comes from, but there's something that's kind of often overlooked but very important. So in Britain, your accent is strongly linked to class. And it's not, I don't think that's very common in other countries. I mean, the US, for example, your accent might tell you where you're from, but it doesn't always hint at your social class. But in the UK, it usually does. So received pronunciation, like I mentioned earlier, it's long been associated with like private education, wealth, status. That's why a lot of politicians and broadcasters and actors used to train themselves to speak it. And it wasn't just about, being clear. It was more about like fitting in with the elite or being seen as like, more intelligent or something like that. But things are changing. So these days, regional accents, they're more accepted. They're even celebrated. Even a lot of people sometimes, they get called out for being too posh or for like putting it on. And some famous Brits like footballers or TV presenters, they kind of wear their regional accents with pride because it makes them more relatable to people. So we're slowly moving away from this idea that there's like a better way to speak. Some prejudice still remains, obviously it always will, I think, but studies show that people with like northern or working class accents are sometimes perceived as less intelligent or less capable, even though we know it's complete nonsense. But yeah, accents in the UK, they're still deeply political and kind of connected to class. And this leads us to another topic that we need to talk about, which is accent bias, because it is real and it affects people in very tangible ways. So accent bias is when people make judgments about someone's intelligence, their trustworthiness, or their competence based solely on the way they speak. And in the UK, it is surprisingly harsh. Some accents, like received pronunciation or certain Southern English accents, are often seen as more neutral or educated, while others like Scouse, Brummie, which is from Birmingham, or certain West Country accents, they're unfairly viewed as less credible or sometimes even less friendly. And this is true, and I do it myself as well. If I was saying this the other day to somebody that, I know I probably shouldn't say this, but it is true. Like, you could be like an astrophysicist, and if you speak with a Brummie accent, people aren't going to take you seriously. I don't know why that is. I don't know what it is about the sound or the intonation of the accent, but to me also it doesn't sound intelligent, and I don't know whether that's something internal or it's actually come from the media or something has influenced that view. I'm not sure where it comes from, but there's been tons of studies as well showing accent bias that, plays out in job interviews, courtrooms, even classrooms. People with certain accents are less likely to be hired for like high status jobs, even in law, finance, media, unless they soften or change how they speak. And it's one of those unspoken barriers that a lot of people have to deal with. Myself included, my accent has changed massively over the last 10 years. I've not lived in the UK for 10 years, and obviously I teach English, so I need to speak in like a clear way. But I didn't used to have this accent. My accent was a lot more closed, and I used to, chop a lot of sounds off, and now I pronounce things, let's say, properly in, quotation marks. But I remember when I moved to university, I went to university in Wales. None of my housemates were Welsh, but most of them were from South England, and they would literally take the piss out of me, like joke at me, for my accent, because I had a northern accent, and it sounded, stupid in their view, or funny, let's say. I was like, well, that's just the way I speak. Like, what do you want me to do? So it's kind of, it's bad, people can internalize this bias. So they might start to believe that their accent holds them back. Again, myself, I had to actually change my accent when I started teaching English because people could not understand my accent. So yeah, people might, start believing that it holds them back or that they need to change, to be taken seriously. And that can really knock your confidence, especially if you're proud of where you come from. And it's not just about job prospects either. Accent bias can affect how you're treated socially as well. Someone might talk down to you, interrupt you more, or simply just not listen in the same way, all because of how you sound. And it's subtle, but it's real. The good news is more people are starting to call it out. There are campaigns to celebrate linguistic diversity and challenge stereotypes and stuff, and more employers are being trained to spot and deal with unconscious bias as well, but we've still got a long way to go, I think. So if you are learning English, or even if you're a native speaker, just remember no accent is better than another. They're just different ways of expressing yourself. And everyone deserves to be heard. But let's not forget, an accent isn't just a way of speaking, it's also part of your identity as well. It tells people where you're from, who your community is, what your story might be. And that's why people really push back against losing their accent. And if they move to London or get a job in the media, they might feel pressured to kind of tone it down or smooth it down. But a lot of people do resist that, and they do stick to their guns. They don't want to blend in, they want to stand out and represent where they're from. And that's fair enough, why should everyone sound the same? It would make the world quite a duller place if everyone sounded the same. Accents connect you to your home and to your family, and they tell a story before you even open your mouth fully. And I think there's something kind of beautiful in that. So yeah, enough with English accents. Let's take a look at kind of American accents. Let's compare to the US. So the US is absolutely enormous compared to the UK. So logically, you'd expect even more regional variation, but actually American English is kind of surprisingly uniform. Yes, there are differences. You've got like the Southern drawl from Southern States, you've got the New York accent, you've got Boston vowels, the shift vowels, but they're not nearly as dense as in the UK. But the question is why? I've looked it up, done a bit of research. There's a few reasons. First up, mobility. So Americans, historically they moved around a lot. They, went westward with the gold rush, the Dust Bowl, and you had all the rise in industrial cities. So all these events caused like huge internal migration, and that mixed accents together and kind of flattened some of the differences. Second, media. So American radio and television created this kind of standard American English, so-called general American accent, became, kind of default for a lot of national broadcasters. And then also, you need to remember British English had centuries, to split into different dialects before the US even existed. So American English is a lot younger than British English, and so it didn't have that much time to splinter. Also, there's kind of like cultural drive in the US to smooth out differences. So in Britain, like we said, accent and class are quite closely linked. But in America, there's more emphasis on equality and unity, at least on the surface. So people tend to iron out, strong regional features when they move or, go into business or media. It's not to say that American English is boring, far from it. The slang coming out of cities like New York or LA is constantly evolving, but overall the range of accents per square mile is much lower than it is in the UK. Okay, let's wrap things up with some kind of bigger differences between British and American English, just to get them on your radar. We could go on about this for ages, but here's a few of the main ones. So if we talk about vocabulary, for example, we've got tons of vocabulary differences, like talking about the car, like the boot of your car, like the storage compartment in your car. UK English would say boot, in the US they'd say trunk. If we talk about food, we've got biscuits in the UK, which is something you dip in your tea. In the US they call it a cookie. In the UK we've got a lorry, which is like a big car. In the US they call it a truck. In the UK we say holiday, in the US they say vacation. In the UK we say rubber, meaning eraser. In the US rubber means something entirely different. It's actually kind of a slang word for a condom, so be careful if you ask someone for rubber in the US. They might think you're asking them for something else. So a few vocabulary differences, spelling differences as well, huge. In Britain we often keep the older kind of French influenced spellings, so colour, is C-O-L-O-U-R, okay, so we keep the O-U-R. Favour is spelt with O-U-R, whereas in American English they don't put the U, it's just COLOR, FAVOR, so without the U. Centre is spelled RE at the end in the UK English. In American English, it's spelled ER. We keep S's instead of Z's in UK English, like the word analyze is spelled with an S in UK English. In American English, it's spelled with a Z. So you do get quite a few different spelling differences, grammar differences as well. So Brits tend to use the present perfect a lot more than Americans do. So I just said, for example, I would say I've just eaten. Someone from America might say I just ate, which sounds a bit weird to a British ear. Collective nouns as well. In the UK we see them as being plural, but in America it's kind of more singular. So it seems in the UK we'd say the team are winning. In the US they'd say the team is winning. Pronunciation as well, huge pronunciation. Obviously we've got so many accents in the UK, but in general Brits tend to drop the R sound at the ends of words. So it's a car, for example. Americans have a rhotic R that they actually pronounce, so they'd say like car, so you get car. Stress changes as well. So in the UK we've got advert, in the US they've got advertise. So stress changes as well in words. And just like general slang and expressions. You know, for example, the UK would say I'm knackered. In the US they'd say I'm exhausted. Taking the mick or taking the piss in the UK. You'd say like making fun of someone in the US. Yeah, we've got tons of phrases. I think I do have another video actually. You can find that on my channel anyway. But yeah, huge differences between British English and American English. But there you have it anyway. That's our kind of brief look at why British English is so incredibly varied. If you are an English learner, the kind of main takeaway today is there's no such thing as a perfect accent. Whether you end up sounding a bit American, slightly British, somewhere in between, the important thing is that being understood, being natural and using English to express your own voice is more important than how exactly you sound. So try not to get bogged down in trying to sound like a native, because, you know, there's so many accents that it's impossible to do anyway. Instead, soak up the language from different places, tune into the way people speak, and just pick up bits and pieces as you go that feel natural to you. So before I wrap up, I just want to give you a little tip. So next time you watch like a British film or TV series, don't just focus on the words. Listen to the rhythm, the tone, the pronunciation. Can you hear their accent? You know, try and guess where that person might be from. What expressions do they use that you've never heard before? You know, you can watch stuff like Peaky Blinders to understand the Birmingham accent, Derry Girls for Northern Irish, Gavin and Stacey for Welsh accents, or even The Crown if you want to hear RP, more kind of posh accents. You'll start to tune your ear a bit. You might even pick up a few phrases to throw in the mix as well. So that's all from me today. Thanks for listening. If you found it interesting, please do subscribe, share the episode, drop me a message. I'd love to hear what you think about the first episode. Let me know in the comments.